In Dust Creek, Texas, 1885, the deadliest shot in the state serves whiskey with a smile. Sarah Reynolds appears to be just another quiet barmaid, until you notice how her eyes track every movement in the room, or how her fingers rest with practiced dudes near her hidden Remington. The Mason gang is about to learn the hard way that appearances can kill. They see a timid woman who jumps at loud noises. They don't know she once put 3 bullets through 3 men's hearts at 800 yards. A shot that Army sharpshooters still talk about in whispers. They mock her silence, never realizing it's the same patient stillness that helped her eliminate an entire Apache war party without a single miss. Tonight, when they try to take over her town, they'll discover why some call her Ghost Eyes, because the last thing their victims ever see is her quiet smile from across impossible distances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Texas sky blood red as Sarah Reynolds began her morning routine at Dusty's saloon. Her movements were precise, economical. The same efficiency that once made her legendary with a rifle now applied to arranging bottles and wiping down the weathered bar. Every motion had purpose, though none of the town's early risers would notice. "Morning, Miss Sarah," old Tom Baker called out as he took his usual spot. His boots left dusty prints on the floor she'd just swept. "Usual breakfast, if you don't. Mind? Coming right up, Mr. Baker." Yes, sir. Her voice was soft, carefully cultivated to sound timid. It was the voice of someone who'd never killed a man at 900 yards. Someone who'd never earned the nickname Ghost Eyes from hardened military scouts. The morning regulars filtered in as the sun climbed higher. Ranchers grabbing coffee before heading to their fields. Miners heading home from night shifts. Every face, every schedule, every pattern carefully noted and filed away in Sarah's mind. Intelligence gathering was a habit she couldn't break, even after 5 years of hiding. Through the window, she watched Deputy Thomas make his morning rounds. Young, earnest, trying hard to fill the boots of a father who died wearing the badge. He tipped his hat as he passed, earning one of her small practice smiles, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Don't know why you waste time being polite to that boy." Martha Wilson sniffed from her corner table. The widow's sharp tongue was as legendary as her apple pies. 3rd-generation lawman, but this one's soft, not like his daddy or granddaddy. Sarah kept her thoughts to herself as she refilled Martha's coffee. The deputy wasn't soft. He was careful. She'd seen him draw once, stopping a drunken brawl. His hand had moved with the smooth speed of natural talent. But he hesitated before pulling the trigger, and in her world, hesitation meant death. The saloon's bat-wing doors creaked, admitting Hank Mason and 2 of his boys. Sarah's fingers twitched instinctively toward the rifle hidden beneath the bar, but her face remained placid. The Mason gang had been pushing into town gradually, testing boundaries, measuring responses. "Well, if it ain't the mouse of Dusty's saloon," Hank drawled, sprawling at the bar. His eyes wandered over her deliberately, seeking a reaction. "Ain't natural how quiet you are. Man might think you was hiding something." Sarah ducked her head, playing her role. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" "Whiskey. The good stuff, not the horse piss you serve these dirt farmers." His companions laughed on cue, maybe a smile that don't look like you're attending a funeral. She poured their drinks with steady hands, remembering a time when she'd eliminated her Confederate sharpshooter unit one by one, 5 kills in under 3 minutes. The memory helped her maintain her meek expression as Hank continued his needling. "You know what I heard?" He leaned forward, whiskey spilling. "Heard this place used to belong to your uncle. Man dies suspicious-like, and his mouse of a niece inherits everything. Mighty convenient. The lie had been carefully crafted. Uncle James was very much alive, running intelligence operations from a desk in Washington. But his death had provided the perfect cover for his best civilian contractor to disappear into anonymity. I'm just grateful He remembered me in his will, Sarah murmured. The perfect picture of demure femininity, even as her mind calculated angles, distances, threats. Mason's right-hand man by the window, useful field of fire, but too many civilians in the background. The younger one near the door, better target, clean line of sight to the street. Grateful. Hank spat the word. That's all you ever are, ain't it? Grateful and quiet and proper. Makes a man wonder what's really going on behind those ghost eyes. Of yours. The nickname hit like a physical blow, but Sarah never flinched. Instead, she dropped a glass, letting it shatter, jumped at the noise like a nervous fawn. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll clean that right up." Her performance drew the expected sneers. Sarah Reynolds, the timid barmaid, afraid of loud noises. Not Sarah Reynolds, the woman who'd once orchestrated a firefight that left 17 men dead without ever revealing her position. As she swept up the broken glass, Sarah noted the way Hank's men positioned themselves. Military training, or at least some experience. The gang was evolving, becoming more professional, more dangerous. The noon stage rolled in, bringing fresh dust and new faces to watch. Sarah served drinks, smiled her empty smile, and observed everything. 3 strangers who moved like lawmen, probably Pinkertons, following rumors of the Mason gang's activities. A businessman whose suit was too fine for a town like Dust Creek, likely an investor scouting railroad routes. And in the corner, nursing a single whiskey, a man whose stillness matched her own. His presence meant her handlers were worried. Something was coming, something big enough to risk breaking her cover. "More coffee, Mr. Baker?" she asked, playing her part. But her mind was already spinning contingencies, counting ammunition, planning fallback positions. 5 years of peace had been a good run. The man in the corner finished his whiskey and left without a word. On his empty glass, a drop of water had created a small ring on the table. To most, it would look random. To Sarah, it was a message. 3 days. Whatever the Mason gang was planning would happen within 3 days. Sarah continued her routine, refilling drinks, delivering meals, maintaining her facade of unremarkable existence. But beneath the practiced smile, calculations were being made, fields of fire mapped, escape routes planned. They saw a mouse hiding in the shadows of Dusty's saloon. They never thought to ask why a mouse would choose to hide in plain sight, right under the noses of men like Hank Mason. They never wondered why a frightened woman would stay in a town growing more dangerous by the day. But soon, very soon, they'd learn, and Sarah's carefully maintained world of shadows and whiskey glasses would explode in gunfire and blood, just like it always did. The setting sun painted long shadows across Sarah's small room above the saloon. She moved through her evening ritual with mechanical precision, checking each window, each line of sight. The rifle case beneath her bed held more than just her Winchester. It contained the pieces of a life she'd tried to leave behind. Her fingers traced the brass plate on the case. SR, Angel of Death, 1st Division Sharpshooters. The nickname had followed her through 3 wars, 2 continents, and more confirmed kills than any other civilian contractor in Army history. The memory rose unbidden. New Mexico territory. 1879, the smell of sage and gunpowder, an Apache war party targeting a cavalry patrol. She'd positioned herself on a ridge, 800 yards out. Impossible shot, the commander had said. Sun's wrong, wind's wrong, distances too far. 7 shots, 7 kills. The Apache had called her a spirit after that, a ghost who killed from invisible places. The Army had called her an asset. Uncle James had called her the future of warfare. A woman who could move unseen, unnoticed, precisely because men refused to see her as a threat. Sarah checked her hidden holster, the Derringer strapped to her ankle. Different weapons now. Close range. Options better suited for her cover as a barmaid, but she maintained the old habits, daily weapons maintenance. Regular practice behind the saloon storage shed, where her targets showed groupings tight enough to shoot a playing card edge-on at 50 paces. A noise from the street drew her attention. Through her window, she watched 3 of Mason's men harassing the blacksmith's daughter. Their laughter carried up to her room, reminding her of another time, another group of men who'd thought power gave them the right to prey on the weak. Fort Griffin, 1881. A band of deserters terrorizing homesteaders. The army couldn't officially intervene. Deserters were supposed to be arrested, not eliminated, so they'd sent her the ghost they could deny existed. She'd taken the deserters apart systematically, one by one, over 3 days. Long-range shots that seemed impossible, that no one could trace back to the quiet woman passing through town. By the 3rd day, the remaining deserters had been jumping at shadows, convinced they were being hunted by an entire squad of invisible snipers. In reality, it had just been her. One woman with a rifle and the patience of a hunter, the same patience she was using now, watching the Mason gang grow bolder, waiting for the right moment to strike. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Sarah." Deputy Thomas's voice, concerned. "Everything all right? Noticed your light was still on late?" She opened the door, maintaining her timid smile. "Just finishing some mending, Deputy, but thank you for checking." His eyes lingered on her face a moment too long. Of all the townspeople, he was the most perceptive. Sometimes she caught him watching her with a puzzled expression, like a man trying to read a book in a language he didn't quite understand. "Been hearing rumors," he said quietly. "Mason gangs planning something big. Might be wise to visit your relatives for a spell." The warning was genuine, his concern real. She let her hands flutter nervously, playing her part. "Oh, I couldn't. Leave the saloon. Mr. Dusty depends on me." The deputy's jaw tightened. "Miss Sarah, Hank Mason ain't the kind of man who takes no for an answer. And the way he looks at you—" She'd seen those looks. The same way the Apache war chief had looked at the cavalry patrol, like prey to be devoured. The difference was Sarah had put a bullet through the war chief's eye at 900 yards. "I'll be careful," she promised, infusing her voice with just the right amount of fear. Maybe I'll ask Martha Wilson to stay with me for a few days." The suggestion satisfied him, though they both knew the widow's presence wouldn't stop Hank Mason. Still, it maintained Sarah's image, the frightened woman seeking protection from others, never the protector herself. After the deputy left, Sarah returned to her window. The street below was quiet now, but her trained eye caught the signs. Mason's men moving in patterns, establishing observation points. The gang was preparing for something. She thought of the man in the saloon earlier, the one who'd left the 3-day warning. Uncle James wouldn't have sent him unless the situation was critical. The question was, what did the Mason gang have planned that would warrant breaking her cover? A glint of moonlight on metal caught her eye. A rifle barrel in the church tower. Amateur mistake, letting it reflect. These weren't the hardened killers she'd faced before, but that could make them more dangerous, more unpredictable. Sarah moved to her bed, knelt beside it. The rifle case opened silently, revealing her old companion. Her fingers found the familiar grooves, the marks that told stories of impossible shots and lives, ended from distances that seemed to defy physics. 3 days, she whispered to the darkness. 3 days before the quiet barmaid of Dusty's saloon would remind the world why some called her the Angel of Death. She just hoped the town would survive the revelation. Dust Creek's morning calm shattered with gunfire. Sarah was behind the bar when she heard the shots, followed by screaming from the street. Her hand moved instinctively toward her hidden rifle, but she forced herself to flinch instead, dropping. A glass, like the frightened barmaid she pretended to be. Through Dusty's windows, she watched 6 of Mason's riders thunder down Main Street, shooting into the air. New faces among them, professionals by their posture, not the usual local thugs. Their arrival confirmed her handler's warning. The Mason gang was evolving, becoming something more dangerous. "Into the cellar, everyone!" she called out, her voice carefully pitched with fear. The morning customers hurried to comply, leaving Sarah alone to observe through the window's reflection. Hank Mason himself rode point, looking more confident than usual. He'd acquired new guns, military-issue Winchesters that shouldn't be in civilian hands. The way his men moved suggested recent training. Someone was backing them, transforming a local gang into something more organized. "Quite a show, ain't it?" Sarah controlled her startled response at Deputy Thomas's quiet words. She hadn't heard him enter. Sloppy of her. The deputy's hand rested near his gun, but his posture remained casual as he watched the gang's display. "They're getting bolder," she said softly, maintaining her timid demeanor while cataloguing details. New saddles on the horses, matching ammunition belts. Someone had invested heavily in the Mason gang. "Town council's meeting tonight," Thomas said, "talking about bringing in federal marshals." Sarah noted how Mason's men had positioned themselves at key intersections. Tactical awareness, definitely professional training. "Will marshals come in time?" The deputy's silence was answer enough. They both knew Hank Mason wouldn't let outside law interfere with whatever he had planned. The gang's show of force lasted another 10 minutes before they rode out, leaving Main Street littered with spent cartridges. Sarah pretended to tremble as she helped her customers up from the cellar, but her mind was calculating, analyzing. The ammunition they'd wasted on intimidation was expensive, military grade. The guns were new, probably stolen from an army shipment, and the way they'd positioned themselves during their show suggested they were practicing for something bigger. "Miss Sarah," Deputy Thomas lingered after the others left. "Maybe you should take that vacation we discussed." She ducked her head, playing shy. "I couldn't leave Mr. Dusty short-handed, not with the cattle drives coming through next week." The deputy frowned. "Cattle drives bring enough trouble without the Mason gang stirring things up. All that money moving through town?" He trailed off, but Sarah's trained mind completed the scenario. Cattle drives meant paydays, banks full of cash, the perfect target for a newly professional gang looking to make a statement. After Thomas left, Sarah retrieved the spent cartridges from the street, Winchester 44-40s, but with customized powder loads for increased accuracy. The same modifications she'd once used for long-range shooting during the wars. Someone wasn't just arming the Mason gang, they were preparing them for a coordinated assault. The question was, what were they really after? A simple bank robbery wouldn't require this level of preparation. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon as Sarah returned to the saloon. She had 3 days to figure out what Mason was planning. 3 days before she'd have to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting the town that had become her home. Thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming to Dust Creek, and Sarah Reynolds, the angel of death, would have to decide whether to stay hidden in the shadows or step back into the light. Either way, blood would flow. The Mason gang struck at midnight, but not as Sarah expected. No thundering hooves, no gunfire, no dramatic assault. Instead, death came quietly to Dust Creek's sheriff. Sarah heard the shot from her room above the saloon, a muffled crack that most would mistake for a wagon wheel hitting a rut, but she knew the sound of a rifle fitted with a military-grade suppressor. She'd used them often enough herself. By the time Deputy Thomas pounded on her door, she was already dressed her own, weapons carefully hidden beneath her shawl. "Miss Sarah?" His voice cracked with panic. "Someone shot the sheriff. Need you to lock up tight while we—" The second shot caught Thomas in the shoulder, spinning him into her doorframe. Sarah's training took over. She pulled him inside while simultaneously identifying the shooter's position. Church bell tower, roughly 300 yards. Elevated angle suggesting a Winchester with a scope. "Stay down," she ordered. Her timid voice gone, replaced by a tone that had once commanded military units. She ripped his shirt to examine the wound, hands moving with practiced efficiency. Thomas stared at her, pain and confusion warring on his face. "Miss Sarah? Through and through. You'll live." She pressed a folded towel against the wound. Shooters in the bell tower. How many deputies are on duty tonight? 2. But how did you... Another shot shattered her window. Sarah noted the improved accuracy. The shooter was walking their fire, adjusting for wind and elevation. Professional technique. Both deputies are at the sheriff's house? She asked, already knowing the answer. At Thomas's nod, she cursed softly. It's a trap. They'll be waiting. Shouts erupted from the street as Hank Mason's main force arrived, no longer bothering with stealth. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of military-issue rifles being chambered. The gang wasn't just making a show of force now. This was a coordinated takeover. Miss Sarah, Thomas grabbed her arm weakly. The bank. In Cattle Drive money came in today. The bank's not their real target. Sarah moved to her window, staying in the shadows. Mason's men were taking up tactical positions throughout town. Way too many men for a simple robbery. This is about control. They're isolating the law, establishing dominance. The money's just a bonus. She counted at least 20 riders, all armed with new weapons. More watched from rooftops, covering key intersections. The gang had been transformed into a military unit. My father's revolver, Thomas said, trying to rise. In my desk at the office, if I can, you'll bleed out before you reach it. Sarah's mind raced through scenarios, calculating odds. The shooter in the bell tower had them pinned down, but she knew every shadow in this town, every angle, every blind spot. More gunfire erupted as Mason's men began systematically breaking down doors, dragging townspeople into the street. Sarah recognized the pattern. She'd used similar tactics during the wars to secure hostile villages. Through her shattered window, she heard Hank Mason's voice boom across the square. "Good evening, Dust Creek. Time for some changes in management." Sarah's fingers tightened on her hidden rifle. For 5 years she'd maintained her cover. Built a quiet life. Found something close to peace. Now she had a choice. Stay hidden and watch Mason's men terrorize her town. Or remind the world why they called her the Angel of Death. A woman's scream cut through the night. Martha Wilson being dragged from her home. The widow's defiant shouts ended in a sharp crack as one of Mason's men struck her. Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them, the timid barmaid was gone. In her place stood a predator, a ghost that armies had feared. "Deputy Thomas," she said quietly, "I need you to listen very carefully. What you're about to see, it changes everything." She moved to her bed, pulled out the hidden rifle case. The brass plate caught the moonlight. SR, Angel of Death. Thomas's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Who are you?" Sarah assembled her rifle with practiced grace, each movement perfect despite the years. Outside, Hank Mason continued his speech about new management and changing times. "I'm the last thing they'll ever see," she answered simply and moved toward the window. Sarah's rifle felt alive in her hands, an old friend awakening after years of silence. Through her scope, she counted 18 of Mason's men in the street, 4 more on rooftops, and 1 very confident shooter in the church tower who was about to learn about overconfidence. "That's a military rifle," Thomas whispered, recognition in his voice. "Special operations model." Quiet. Sarah's command was soft but absolute. She adjusted her scope, compensating for wind and elevation. The church tower was 317 yards away, a shot she could have made blindfolded in her prime. "When I fire, they'll target this window. Be ready to move." The shooter in the tower shifted, moonlight catching his scope as he searched for targets. Amateur mistake. Sarah exhaled slowly, squeezing the trigger between heartbeats. The tower shooter's rifle clattered to the street. He followed a moment later. Chaos erupted immediately. Mason's men dove for cover, their military training evident in their reactions. But Sarah was already moving, rifle cradled against her shoulder as she half-carried Thomas toward her rooms. "Back exit! How?" Thomas struggled to keep up, blood seeping through his bandage. That shot, it was impossible. Nothing's impossible. Sarah led him down the back stairs. She'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Just improbable. Gunfire shredded her empty room as Mason's men responded to the threat. Their shots were disciplined, coordinated, definitely professional training. But they were shooting at shadows while she moved through passages she'd spent years memorizing. "Find them!" Hank Mason's voice carried through the night. "I want that shooter's head." Sarah helped Thomas into her hidden cellar. "Stay here. Medical. Supplies in the corner. Anyone comes through that door who isn't me, shoot them." "Wait," he grabbed her arm. "You can't take them alone, there's too many." She checked her rifle's action, each movement precise. "I've spent 5 years mapping this town. Every angle, every shadow, every line of sight. They think they're hunting me." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "They have it backwards." Before Thomas could respond, she was gone, moving like smoke through the darkness. Mason's men had organized search parties, moving in tactical formations that would have impressed her under different circumstances. But she'd fought against better. 2 gangsters guarded the alley behind the general store. Their position was textbook perfect for stopping someone trying to escape. But Sarah wasn't escaping. She was hunting. Her first shot caught the leftmost. You guard in the shoulder, deliberate placement to wound, not kill. As his partner turned toward the sound, Sarah's second shot took him in the leg. Both men were down, alive but neutralized. The night erupted with renewed gunfire as Mason's men responded to the shots. But Sarah was already moving, using routes she'd practiced in her mind thousands of times. The timid barmaid who jumped at loud noises had spent 5 years preparing for exactly this scenario. "It's just one shooter." Hank Mason's voice carried an edge of desperation now. "Find the angle." Sarah's next shot came from the opposite side of town, creating the illusion of multiple attackers. Another wounded guard, another position neutralized. She wasn't going for kill shots, not yet. Each wounded man had to be helped, reducing Mason's effective force. But as she moved to her next position, something changed. New riders appeared at the edge of town, reinforcements, armed with the same military rifles. Far more men than she'd anticipated. Through her scope, she caught a glimpse of their leader, a face she recognized from her military days. Colonel Drake Harrison, dishonorably discharged for selling military secrets. The man who'd been training. The Mason gang. The entire operation suddenly made sense. This wasn't just about controlling a small Texas town. Dust Creek was a test run. A demonstration of how Harrison's private military contractors could pacify civilian populations. Sarah's next shot would do more than wound a few gang members. It would expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. And once she took it, there would be no going back to serving drinks and playing timid. She sighted down her rifle, selecting her target with cold precision. Time to remind them why they called her the Angel of Death. Dawn found Dust Creek transformed. Sarah watched from the shadowed ruins of the livery stable as townsfolk gathered in whispered clusters, staring at the evidence of last night's violence. 8 of Mason's men lay wounded in Doc Miller's clinic. Another dozen had fled when their simple takeover turned into a sniper's hunting ground. But it was Colonel Harrison's presence that worried her. He stood in front of the sheriff's office, now his command center, directing his men with military precision. Their weapons and equipment spoke of serious backing. Someone wanted this operation to succeed, wanted proof that private armies could control civilian populations. "Quite a mess you've made." Sarah didn't turn at the quiet voice. She'd been expecting Uncle James's contact since her first shot. "Thought I had 3 days." Martin Chen stepped from the shadows, still wearing his traveling salesman disguise. 20 years in military intelligence had taught him to blend perfectly with his surroundings. Plans change. Harrison moved early. He's not just training them anymore. Sarah tracked the colonel's movements through her scope. This is a demonstration, proving his methods work. It's worse than that. Martin's voice carried an edge she remembered from darker missions. Harrison's got backing from a private military corporation called Aegis. They're watching how his converted gang performs. If this works, they'll duplicate it elsewhere. Sarah lowered her rifle. Turn local. Criminals into private armies. No oversight, no accountability. Exactly. Martin produced a slim folder from his jacket. Harrison's not just training the Mason gang. He's got similar operations in 3 other territories, building a network of deniable assets. Sarah scanned. The intelligence, training schedules, weapons manifests, lists of compromised military officials who could be bribed or blackmailed. How deep does this go? Deep enough that we can't touch it through official channels. Martin's expression was grim. That's why you're here. The ghost they can't trace, the weapon they never see coming. Below, Harrison was organizing search. Parties. His men moved with professional discipline, methodically sweeping buildings they'd learned from last night's chaos. Town's talking about you, Martin noted. Most think multiple shooters. A few remember stories about a female sharpshooter in the wars. Locals are connecting dots we'd rather stayed disconnected. Sarah thought of Deputy Thomas, hidden in her cellar with knowledge that could destroy her cover completely. Cover's already blown. Question is, what are we going to do about it? That's your call. Martin checked his pocket watch. Officials need Harrison's operation shut down, but quietly. No public trials, no headlines about corrupt military contractors. Just a gang that disappeared, a conspiracy that never existed. The Angel of Death's specialty. Sarah's voice carried no emotion. Make problems vanish without leaving evidence. Movement in the street caught her attention. Martha Wilson was confronting Harrison's men, her face still bruised from last night. The widow's voice carried clearly. We know what you are. Ain't no different from the outlaws you pretend to hunt. Harrison backhanded her casually, the action of a man used to absolute control. Example has to be made, he announced to the gathering crowd. Can't have civilians thinking they can resist legitimate authority. Sarah's rifle was up before she consciously decided to move. But Martin's hand on her barrel stopped her. Not yet. Shot like that would start a war. War's already started. Sarah tracked Harrison through her scope. They just don't know it yet. Think bigger picture. Martin's voice carried command authority. Harrison's just middle management. We need the whole network. Names, contacts, money trails. Taking him now alerts his backers. Sarah watched Harrison drag Martha toward the jail, making his point about resistance clear. The widow's defiance never wavered, even as blood trickled from her split lip. They're going to break this town, Sarah said quietly. Make an example of anyone who resists. Show their corporate masters how effectively they can control civilian populations. Yes. Martin didn't soften the truth. That's exactly what they'll do unless someone shows them why some ghosts are best left alone. Sarah chambered around, the sound barely a whisper in the pre-dawn quiet. Then I guess it's time to remind them why armies once feared the Angel of Death. Going loud compromises everything. Martin's warning was professional, not personal. We lose our chance at the bigger fish. Sometimes fish need chum in the water. Sarah's smile carried no warmth. Let's give Harrison's corporate masters something to think about. Movement near the bank caught her attention. More of Harrison's men, unloading military crates, equipment that shouldn't exist outside official channels, the kind of hardware that could turn Dust Creek into an occupied territory. 24 hours, she told Martin. Get your people clear. After that, this town learns why some legends are real. Martin melted away without another word, leaving Sarah alone with her rifle and her memories. Below, Harrison continued organizing his men, confident in his power, his backing, his control of the situation. He never looked up. They never did. Nobody thought to watch the shadows in their rush to claim the light. But Sarah Reynolds had lived in shadows for 5 years, building her web of preparation one quiet day at a time. Now it was time to remind them all why the Angel of Death had never been captured, never been defeated, never left witnesses to tell her tale. The hunt was about to begin. Sarah moved through the hidden spaces of Dust Creek like a ghost, watching Harrison's men transform her town into a military operation. They'd taken over the saloon as their secondary command post, her former workplace now a staging ground for their pacification efforts. "Papers, old man," one of Harrison's guards shoved Mr. Peterson, checking the elderly shopkeeper's newly required identification. "You're out past curfew." Sarah's finger tensed on her rifle's trigger, but she held her position. Patience had always been her deadliest weapon. Through her scope, she counted 4 new weapon shipments being distributed to Mason's remaining men. Military-grade hardware with serial numbers filed off. "Getting sloppy, Colonel," she whispered, photographing the crates with the tiny camera Martin had left her. Each image would help build the case against Harrison's corporate backers, assuming any of them survived what was coming. Movement at the sheriff's office drew her attention. Deputy Thomas was being escorted inside, his wounded shoulder bandaged, but his head held high. He'd managed to escape her cellar before Harrison's men found it, maintaining his cover. But his knowledge made him dangerous to both sides now. "Sir," one of Harrison's lieutenants approached the colonel. "No sign of the shooter, but we found this in the saloon owner's room." Sarah's breath caught as the man held up her old rifle. Case. The brass plate gleamed in the morning sun. SR, Angel of Death. Harrison's reaction was immediate and violent. He grabbed the lieutenant's collar. "Are you certain? That exact inscription?" "Yes, sir. Records confirm Sarah Reynolds worked as a barmaid here for 5 years. But her background check. There are inconsistencies." The colonel's face twisted with something between fear and rage. "Find her. I want every building searched, every civilian questioned. She can't have gone far." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She'd left the rifle case deliberately, knowing Harrison would recognize the signature. Let him remember Mexico, 1879. Let him remember how she'd eliminated his entire Black Ops team without leaving a trace. Some ghosts were best left alone. A commotion near the bank caught her attention. Hank Mason was arguing with Harrison's men, his earlier confidence crumbling as he realized he was no longer in control of his own gang. This wasn't the deal. Mason's voice carried clearly to Sarah's position. "Town was supposed to be ours after you trained us." Harrison backhanded him, casually. "Deals changed. Aegis Corporation wants this territory secured by professionals, not amateur thugs. Be grateful we still have use for you." Sarah documented the exchange, adding it to her growing evidence. But something in Harrison's words nagged at her tactical mind. This territory, not this town. Movement on the roof across the street, a glint of metal that wasn't quite natural. Sarah focused her scope on the position. One of Harrison's professionals setting up what looked like surveillance equipment. But the configuration was wrong for simple observation. "What are you really up to?" she whispered, studying the device. The design was familiar, similar to communication arrays she'd seen in military installations, far more sophisticated than needed for controlling one small town. A sharp cry drew her attention back to street level. Harrison's men were dragging Martha Wilson from her home again, but this time their search seemed specific, targeted. "Check everything," Harrison ordered. "The Angel of Death never works alone. She'll have support networks, supply caches, communication channels. Find them." Sarah's mind raced. Harrison remembered more than she'd expected. He knew her methods, knew she preferred to establish infrastructure before engaging. Which meant, he's not hunting me, she realized. He's mapping my network, using my own tactics against me. The implications hit hard. Every person she'd been friendly with would be questioned. Every location she'd frequented would be searched. Harrison was using her reputation, her history, to identify potential resistance before it could form, and he was right. She did have supply caches throughout town, had cultivated relationships that could be mistaken for operative networks, had established communication channels that could compromise Martin's entire operation if discovered. Sarah shifted position, silently, moving to higher ground as Harrison's men began their systematic search. She'd spent 5 years building a life in Dust Creek, weaving herself into its fabric. Now those same connections could get people killed. Through her scope, she watched Deputy Thomas being questioned. His face revealed nothing, but she knew Harrison's men would be watching for the slightest tell, the smallest indication that he knew more than he should. "Time to change the game," she whispered, chambering around. She couldn't let Harrison continue mapping her infrastructure, couldn't risk him finding her real support network, which meant the Angel of Death needed to come out of the shadows, not as a ghost this time, but as something far more dangerous, a legend made flesh, a nightmare made real. Harrison had made a critical mistake. He remembered her tactics, but forgot her most important lesson. Sometimes the most obvious target is exactly what it appears to be. Sarah lined up her shot, the morning sun warm on her back. Time to remind them all why some legends are written in blood. The shot came at high noon, a single crack that echoed through Dust Creek's tense streets. Harrison's surveillance equipment exploded in a shower of sparks, the operator diving for cover as Sarah's bullet transformed expensive military hardware into useless scrap. She was moving before the echo faded, sliding through shadow passages as Harrison's men responded with disciplined but useless fire. Their shots hit empty air. She was already 3 positions away, setting up her next message. "Rooftop!" someone shouted. "Second floor of the—" Another shot cut the voice short, this one taking the speaker's hat off with surgical precision. No blood, no injury, just a reminder that every person standing in the street was alive because she chose not to kill them. "It's her!" Harrison's voice carried equal parts rage and fear. "The Angel's playing with us." Sarah allowed herself a grim smile as she changed positions again. He remembered her patterns, her preference for psychological warfare over simple killing. But knowing her methods wouldn't help him stop what was coming. "Sir!" One of Harrison's lieutenants rushed up, clutching papers. "We found something in the bank records. Monthly transfers to accounts matching known intelligence operation patterns." Sarah's next shot took the papers from his hands, scattering them in the wind. Let Harrison wonder how many of his discoveries were genuine intelligence and how many were breadcrumbs she'd left deliberately. "Get inside, all of you." Harrison ordered his men into defensive positions. "She's mapping our responses, testing our protocols. Standard containment formation now." But as his men moved to comply, Sarah's next shot shattered the water tower's support strut. Hundreds of gallons cascaded through the streets, turning their containment formation into chaos. She'd spent 5 years planning how to disrupt military tactics in every part of her town. "Colonel Harrison." Her voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent street. Everyone froze. It was the first time she'd spoken publicly since revealing herself. "Still using standard army tactical responses? Still predictable? Show yourself." Harrison scanned rooftops frantically. "Face. Be like a soldier. Like you faced the villagers in Mexico?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Or like you faced the corporate investigators asking about missing weapon shipments?" That hit home. Sarah watched through her scope as Harrison's face twisted with recognition. "That operation was classified. How did you—" "I know everything." "Colonel?" Another shot, another piece of surveillance equipment destroyed. "About Aegis Corporation, about their plans for private military expansion. About the other towns you've pacified for them." Movement caught her eye. Deputy Thomas slipping something into his pocket while Harrison was distracted. Good man. He'd found the evidence she'd left about Harrison's operation. "You think you can stop what's coming?" Harrison's laugh held an edge of madness. Aegis has government contracts, military backing. This is the future of law enforcement. No, Sarah's voice turned cold. This is the past repeating itself. Mexico, 1879, when you learned what happens to men who think power means they can prey on the innocent. The color drained from Harrison's face. We had orders. Those villages were harboring children. Sarah cut him off. They were harboring children, and you gave orders to fire anyway. Through her scope, she saw the moment Harrison's control snapped. Burn it, he screamed. Burn everything. She can't hide if there's nowhere left to hide. His men hesitated, but Mason's gang moved quickly, eager to unleash violence. Sarah watched them break out kerosene, torches, the tools of destruction she'd known they'd eventually turn to. Last chance, Colonel. Her voice carried sadness now. Leave my town. Take your corporate master's dreams of private armies with you. Or, what? Harrison's confidence returned as the first buildings began to smoke. You'll kill me? Become the monster they already think you are? Sarah's answer was a shot that severed the general store's support beam. The falling roof scattered Masons. Arsonists preventing them from spreading their fires. Wrong question. Sarah chambered another round. The real question is, how many of your men are willing to die for Aegis Corporation's profit margins? The fires died quickly under her precise shooting, each bullet finding water barrels, support, structures, anything that would help contain the flames. She'd mapped every possible defensive measure in this town, prepared for exactly this scenario. You can't protect everyone, Harrison shouted. Sooner or later, you'll make a mistake. And when you do, when I do, Sarah's voice hardened, you'll learn why they really call me the Angel of Death. Because judgment comes to all men, Colonel, even those who think themselves above it. The sun hung high over Dust Creek, painting stark shadows across streets that had become a battlefield. Sarah watched Harrison's men regain their composure, return to their practiced formations. But she saw the fear in their eyes now, the growing realization that they weren't facing a simple sharpshooter, they were facing a legend, a ghost made flesh. A reckoning 5 years in the making, and the real hunt hadn't even begun. Night fell on Dust Creek like a funeral shroud. Sarah watched from her hidden perch as Harrison's men set up floodlights, trying to eliminate the shadows she used so effectively. Their fear was visible in every movement, every nervous glance, toward dark corners. They'd spent the day jumping at ghosts, never knowing which shadow might hold the Angel of Death. Miss Sarah? Deputy Thomas's whisper barely carried to her position. He'd gotten good at moving quietly these past 2 days. Got that information you wanted? She didn't turn, keeping her rifle trained on Harrison's command post. Tell me, Aegis Corporation's got operations in 6 other territories, all following the same pattern. Local gangs suddenly getting military training, taking over towns. But Dust Creek's different. He paused, letting that sink in. We're a test case, proving they can control civilian populations through private military contractors. Makes sense. Sarah tracked a patrol through her scope. Their formation was sloppy, fatigue setting in after hours of heightened alert. Dust Creek's isolated, no telegraph, limited outside communication, perfect laboratory for their experiment. A scream cut through the night. Sarah's rifle snapped toward the sound. Automatically. That's Martha Wilson, Thomas said unnecessarily. They're questioning her again. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, but she held her position. Emotional responses got people killed. What else did you find? Aegis has government contracts, worth millions, military connections at the highest levels. They're positioning themselves to privatize law enforcement across the whole frontier. Thomas's voice hardened, and they're willing to kill anyone who stands in their way. As if to emphasize his point, another scream echoed from the jail. Sarah counted her remaining ammunition mechanically, forcing down the rage that threatened her control. Harrison's getting desperate, she noted, watching the colonel pace in his command post. He knows his corporate masters won't tolerate failure, especially not against a single shooter. About that, Thomas hesitated. People are talking, stories, about a female sharpshooter during the wars, about impossible shots and missions that never officially happened. Stories are just stories. But Sarah was already calculating new variables. Her legend was spreading, complicating everything. Not these stories. Thomas moved closer, still careful to stay in shadow. They say the Angel of Death wasn't just a sniper, she was a symbol. Proof that one person could stand against an army if their cause was just. A bitter laugh escaped Sarah's throat. There was nothing just about what I did. I was a weapon, pointed at whatever target they chose. Then why are you helping us now? Before she could answer, movement near the bank caught her attention. Harrison's men were unloading more crates, but these were different. The way they handled them suggested explosives. They're changing tactics, she said, focusing her scope on the activity, done trying to maintain the illusion of legitimate authority. Another scream from the jail, abruptly cut short. Sarah's control nearly snapped, but Thomas's hand on her arm steadied her. Martha knew what she was doing, he said quietly. She wanted to be caught, wanted them to focus on her instead of the other preparations being made. Sarah's voice carried grim understanding. The widow's defiance wasn't just courage, it was strategy. Through her scope, she watched Harrison emerge from the jail, wiping blood from his hands. The Colonel's composed mask had cracked, revealing the monster she remembered from Mexico. "Time to end this," she whispered, but Thomas's grip tightened. "Wait, there's more." He produced a crumpled document from his jacket. "Found this in the bank records. Aegis isn't just training private armies, they're buying up land. Thousands of acres, all through shell companies." Sarah studied the paper, pieces clicking into place. "Railroads coming through this territory next year." "Exactly. Whoever controls these towns controls the railroad access, worth millions in contracts, shipping rights, and they need to prove they can maintain order." Sarah's mind raced ahead. Show potential investors that private military contractors can pacify resistant populations. A new sound cut through the night, the rhythmic pounding of hammers. Sarah shifted position to get a better view, cold dread settling in her stomach as she saw what Harrison's men were building. "Gallows," Thomas whispered. "Right in the town square." Sarah watched Harrison supervise the construction, his manner almost cheerful now. The colonel had found his balance again, remembered his own capacity for cruelty. "Public executions tomorrow," she said flatly. "Make examples of anyone who's resisted. Show everyone the price of defiance." "We have to stop them." Thomas's control cracked slightly. "Martha, the others." "We will." Sarah's voice had changed, becoming something colder, harder, the voice that armies had learned to fear. But not the way they expect. She began breaking down her rifle with swift precision, each movement practiced until it was poetry. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked. "They're building gallows." "Yes." Sarah's smile held no warmth. "Which means they'll be focused on the ground, on their display of power. They've forgotten the first lesson I taught Harrison in Mexico." "Which is?" Sarah reassembled her rifle, the click of metal on metal somehow more menacing than any threat. "Real power isn't about who you can kill, it's about who you can save." She stood, a shadow among shadows, the angel of death awakening fully after 5 years of slumber. "Get word to our people. Tonight, we remind Harrison why some legends are best left in the dark." The gallows took shape under the floodlights. Harrison's men working with grim efficiency. They never looked up. They never saw the death watching from above, counting ammunition and calculating angles. But they would. Soon, they all would. The rescue came at midnight, silent as a prayer. One moment, Harrison's prisoners were in their cells. The next, they vanished like smoke. No shots fired, no alarms raised, just empty chains and baffled guards who swore they'd been watching every second. "Impossible!" Harrison raged, throwing a chair across his command post. "4 guards, locked doors. She couldn't have—" "Sir!" A lieutenant burst in, face pale. "There's more. Wilson's widow, the other prisoners, written statements have appeared at every house in town. Testimonies about Aegis Corporation, your operations, everything." Sarah watched through her scope as Harrison's composure cracked completely. She'd spent the night placing those documents herself, each one detailing a piece of the conspiracy. By morning, everyone in Dust Creek would know exactly what kind of monsters they were facing. "Find them!" Harrison's voice carried across the square. "Search every building, every cellar, A single shot cut him off, destroying the lamp next to his head." In the sudden darkness, Sarah's voice drifted from the shadows. "Still haven't learned, Colonel. Still thinking like a soldier instead of a hunter." His men fired blindly into the night, but Sarah was already moving. 5 years of preparation had turned Dust Creek into her personal hunting ground. Every roof, every shadow, every line of sight mapped and memorized. "You're just one shooter," Harrison shouted into the darkness. "You can't be everywhere." Another shot answered him, taking out another light, then another, and another, each from a different position, creating the illusion of multiple snipers. An old trick, but effective against men already jumping at shadows. "Sir," one of Harrison's professionals spoke quietly. Words spreading beyond the town. Riders came in from Carson's Creek, asking about the Angel of Death. They say she's some kind of spirit, protecting honest folks from corporate takeovers. She's not a spirit. Harrison's control slipped further. She's a weapon, a killer, a reckoning. Sarah's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "For Mexico, for the villages, for every innocent life you sacrificed to corporate greed." Through her scope, she watched Thomas moving carefully through the chaos, planting more evidence where it would be found. The deputy had proven himself invaluable, understanding exactly how to use Harrison's paranoia against him. "Your corporate masters are watching, Colonel." Sarah chambered another round. "Watching you fail. Watching their perfect plan crumble against one shooter they can't catch." As if to emphasize her point, another shot took out the telegraph wire. Harrison's last direct link to Aegis Corporation severed with surgical precision. "You're trapped here now," she continued, moving positions again. "No reinforcements coming, no orders to hide behind, just you, your men, and the ghosts of everyone you've killed." Dawn was approaching, painting the sky blood red. Sarah noted how Harrison's men huddled closer to their lights, their tactical discipline cracking under the strain of fighting an enemy they couldn't see. "The Angel of Death," one of Mason's gang members crossed himself. "My pa told stories about her. Said she could kill a man at 1,000 yards. Said no one ever saw her coming." "Shut up," Harrison struck the man. "She's not some legend. She's flesh and blood, and flesh bleeds, does it?" Sarah let her voice carry just enough amusement. "Ask your men about Mexico, Colonel, about how many bullets they fired without drawing a single drop of my blood. The effect was perfect." She watched Harrison's mercenaries exchange nervous glances, remembering stories they'd dismissed as campfire tales. The Angel of Death, the ghost that hunted corrupt soldiers, the spirit of vengeance that could appear anywhere, strike from impossible distances. "Sir?" The lieutenant's voice shook slightly. Maybe we should consider withdrawing." "Aegis Corporation has other territories, other—" "No!" Harrison's grabbed the man's collar. "She dies here. Today. Even ghosts can't dodge enough bullets." A new sound cut through the pre-dawn quiet, hoofbeats approaching from the east. Sarah shifted her attention, tracking multiple riders through her scope. More of Harrison's men, but their formation was wrong. Too spread out, too cautious. "Bounty hunters," Thomas whispered from his hidden position below. "Word spread about the Angel of Death. Every gunslinger between here and Mexico will be coming to make their reputation. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Good. Let them come. Let them all come. Sarah. Thomas's voice carried genuine concern. You can't fight them all. I don't have to fight them. She sighted down her rifle, selecting her target with cold precision. I just have to make them fear me more than they fear Harrison's money. The first bounty hunter appeared at the edge of town, rifle held confidently. Sarah's shot took the weapon from his hands without drawing blood. Her next 3 shots disarmed his companions just as precisely. Welcome to Dust Creek, gentlemen. Her voice carried clearly in the morning air. I hear you're hunting ghosts. The bounty hunters stared at their empty hands, at the impossible shots that had disarmed them without injury. Professional killers, suddenly remembering every story. They'd ever heard about the Angel of Death. Consider this your only warning. Sarah chambered another round, the sound somehow louder than the shots had been. There are 2 kinds of people in this world. Those who've learned to fear the dark, and those who haven't lived long enough to learn that lesson yet. She watched them retreat, their confidence shattered by a demonstration of skill that would spawn a dozen new legends. Behind them, Harrison's men looked even more unsettled. The sun crept higher, burning away shadows, but not the fear that had taken root in Dust Creek. Sarah changed positions one final time, preparing for what she knew would come next. Harrison would respond to this humiliation with overwhelming force, would try to drown his fear in blood and fire. It was what he'd done in Mexico, what he'd do again here. But this time, the Angel of Death was ready. This time, the legend they feared was exactly as dangerous as the stories claimed. And when Harrison made his move, he'd learn why some ghosts were best left to rest. The betrayal came from the last person Sarah expected. She was changing positions, moving through the pre-dawn shadows, when she heard the distinctive click of a revolver being cocked. Don't move, Miss Sarah. Deputy Thomas's voice carried genuine regret. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Sarah froze, not from the threat, but from tactical assessment. Thomas had positioned himself perfectly, covering her only escape route. He'd learned her movements too well over the past days. How long? She asked quietly, still facing away from him. Since the beginning. His voice remained steady. Aegis. Corporation placed me here 3 years ago, before you even arrived. That revelation hit hard. Everything she thought she knew about Dust Creek's situation shifted. You're their advanced scout, testing towns for takeover potential. Among other things. She heard him take a step closer. We knew someone was watching frontier towns, investigating our operations. Just never guessed it was the Angel of Death. Herself, Sarah's mind raced through implications. The sheriff's death, you helped them time it. Had to. Another step. Man wouldn't take a bribe, wouldn't look the other way while we established control. Unlike his son, the betrayal stung more than Sarah wanted to admit. She'd started trusting Thomas, seeing him as a potential ally, maybe even something more. Harrison doesn't know, does he? She kept him talking, evaluating options. About your real role. Colonel Harrison is a blunt instrument, useful for intimidation but too unstable for delicate work. Thomas's voice carried professional disdain. My handlers at Aegis prefer subtle methods, integration, infiltration, turning communities against themselves. A scream cut through the darkness. Martha Wilson again. Sarah's fingers twitched toward her rifle, but Thomas noticed. Don't. His voice hardened. Martha knew what she was getting into. She helped you spy on us, passed information. Actions have consequences. Like betraying your own town? Sarah let bitterness seep into her voice. Your own people. These aren't my people. He moved closer still. This is just another assignment, like the dozen towns before it. Though I admit, you complicated things considerably. Through practiced. Stillness. Sarah evaluated distances, angles, possibilities. Thomas had learned her tactics well, but he'd missed something crucial. "You know what your corporate masters really want?" She kept her voice casual. "Why they're so interested in these territories. The railroad contracts, the shipping rights. We've been through this." "No." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "That's what Harrison thinks, what you think. But I found something in those bank records, something bigger." She felt Thomas's interest sharpen. "What are you talking about?" "Gold." Sarah spoke the word quietly. "The geological surveys, hidden in coded messages. These territories are sitting on one of the largest gold deposits ever discovered. Aegis Corporation isn't just buying towns. They're buying the richest mining rights in American history." She heard Thomas's breath catch. This was why he'd been an advanced scout, not a soldier. He understood the value of information. "You're lying," but doubt crept into his voice. "My handlers would have told me." "Would they?" Sarah turned slightly, letting him see her profile. "Or do they tell their scouts just enough to be useful? Like they tell Harrison just enough to follow orders?" Another scream from the jail. Closer this time. Sarah felt Thomas flinch. "You're not as good at this as you think," she said softly. "Still care too much. Still feel every betrayal. That's why they'll never truly trust you with the whole operation." "Shut up." But his aim wavered slightly. "You don't know anything." About the shot came from above, a single crack that sent Thomas sprawling. Not dead, Sarah's bullet had taken him in the shoulder, just like she'd once trained Harrison's men to do. "You forgot the first rule I taught them in Mexico," she said, turning to face his shocked expression. "Always check the high ground." Through her scope, Sarah's second rifle remained rock steady where she'd positioned it earlier. A custom mount, with a pressure trigger, old trick but effective against someone who thought they knew all her methods. "That's impossible," Thomas gasped, clutching his wound. "No one can rig a shot like that. No one can. I told you once that legends are just stories." Sarah knelt beside him, retrieving his weapon. "I lied. Sometimes legends are warnings, reminders of why some lines should never be crossed." The night erupted with gunfire as Harrison's men responded to the shot. But Sarah was already moving, taking Thomas with her. The deputy might be a traitor, but he was also a source of information, and right now she needed every advantage, because his betrayal had revealed something crucial. Aegis Corporation's operation was bigger than anyone suspected. Their private army scheme was just cover for something that would reshape the entire frontier. Sarah dragged Thomas into the shadows, as Harrison's men searched frantically for the source of the shot. Above them, her mounted rifle waited silently, a reminder that some legends are earned one impossible shot at a time. The real war was just beginning. And this time, the Angel of Death wasn't just fighting for one town. She was fighting for the future of the American frontier itself. Sarah secured Thomas in a root cellar she'd prepared months ago, binding his wound with practiced efficiency. The deputy watched her with new eyes, finally seeing the legend beneath the barmaid's facade. "You really did all those things, didn't you?" His voice was weak from blood loss. "The shots they said were impossible, the missions that couldn't have happened." "Be quiet." She checked his restraints. "Save your strength for explaining exactly how deep Aegis Corporation's network goes." A commotion from the street drew her attention. Through the cellar's concealed viewing slot, she watched Harrison organize search parties, his movements increasingly frantic. "He's afraid," Thomas said softly. "Not of you, of failing. Aegis Corporation doesn't tolerate failure." "No." Sarah's voice hardened. "They just sacrifice expendable assets, like they'll sacrifice you when this is over." The truth hit home. She saw it in his eyes, the realization that he was just another pawn in their game, another deniable asset to be discarded. "When convenient, they're bringing in their elite units," he said finally. "Not just mercenaries, professional wetwork teams, specialists in making problems disappear." "How many?" 30, maybe 40, led by Commander James Blake. Sarah went very still. Blake was a ghost from her past, a reminder of darker missions and harder choices. You're sure about that name? He specifically requested this assignment when he heard about the Angel of Death. Thomas studied her reaction, said something about settling old debts. The implications were staggering. If Blake was involved, this went beyond corporate greed. Beyond gold claims and railroad contracts, this was about power at the highest levels. What aren't you telling me? Sarah's voice could have frozen hell. What's Blake really after? Thomas hesitated, but the truth spilled out anyway. Aegis Corporation isn't just buying territory. They're building a private empire. Armed forces, resources, political influence, everything they need to operate above the law. And Dust Creek, proving ground, showing their investors they can pacify any resistance, that private armies can control American soil without government oversight. A new sound cut through their conversation. Wagon wheels approaching from the east. Sarah moved to another viewing slot, watching heavy cargo wagons roll into town under armed guard. Weapons, Thomas confirmed. Experimental rifles, artillery, pieces that shouldn't exist. Everything Blake needs to turn this territory into a killing ground. Sarah's mind raced through implications. Blake wouldn't just attack her, he'd raise the entire town, destroy everything to prove Aegis Corporation's absolute power. They're going to kill everyone, she whispered. Make an example. Show what happens. To communities that resist, now you understand. Thomas's voice carried genuine regret. Why I chose their side, why I betrayed. No, Sarah cut him off. I understand why you're going to help me stop them. His eyes widened. They'll kill me. Maybe. She checked her ammunition with mechanical precision. But right now, you're going to help me save every life you put at risk, starting with Martha Wilson. Because that was the real difference between them. Between the legend of the Angel of Death and Aegis Corporation's disposable pawns. Some lines weren't meant to be crossed. Some debts had to be paid in full. And Sarah Reynolds was about to remind them all why some legends are written in blood. Commander James Blake arrived at sunset, his presence transforming Harrison's undisciplined operation into something far more lethal. Sarah watched through her scope as Blake's elite teams deployed with cold precision, establishing, interlocking, fields of fire that would make her previous tactics useless. He's good, Thomas whispered from his position beside her. The deputy's wound had been properly treated, his restraints replaced with a mutual understanding. Better than Harrison ever was. He should be. Sarah tracked Blake's movements as he inspected the town's defenses. I trained him. That revelation hung heavy in the growing darkness. Below, Blake was systematically dismantling every advantage she'd established over the past days. His men replaced Harrison's obvious sentries with hidden observation posts, transformed crude roadblocks into sophisticated kill zones. You know his tactics, Thomas said. His weaknesses. He knows mine too. Sarah shifted position slightly, compensating for the changing light. That's why Aegis Corporation sent him. Blake remembers Mexico, remembers how I think. Through her scope, she watched Blake examine the gallows that still stood in the town square. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah recognized the cold calculation in his movements. He was already planning how to use her conscience against her, Martha Wilson and the other prisoners. Thomas said quietly, he'll use them as bait. Of course he will. Sarah's voice carried no emotion. Blake understands psychological warfare, knows I won't let innocent people die. A new sound drew their attention, wagon wheels approaching from the east. But these weren't supply wagons. These carried something far more dangerous. Artillery pieces, Thomas identified them. Experimental weapons, Aegis Corporation's latest toys. Sarah watched the heavy guns being positioned around town. Blake was establishing a killing field, preparing to destroy everything if he couldn't. Root her out directly. He's not just planning to kill you, Thomas realized. He's going to obliterate Dust Creek, make an example that will terrify every territory Aegis Corporation wants to control. No, Sarah's voice hardened. He's going. To try, she led Thomas through shadow passages to a hidden cellar beneath the livery stable. Inside, Martha Wilson and the other rescued prisoners were already preparing weapons. Not just guns, tools, farm implements, anything that could be used in the coming fight. "They've watched Blake's men deploying," Martha reported, her bruised face set with determination. Ellen's boy, Tommy, counted 43 new shooters, all with military rifles. Sarah nodded, unsurprised by the widow's tactical awareness. 5 years of playing timid had taught her that true strength often hid behind humble facades. "Blake will expect us to run," she told the gathered townspeople, "to scatter into the hills while he makes an example of those who stay. That's what happened in other towns, what always happens when Aegis Corporation moves in." "Not this time." Martha's voice carried steel. "This is our home." Sarah studied the faces around her. Farmers, shopkeepers, ordinary people pushed too. Far, in their eyes, she saw the same determination she'd once seen in Mexican villages, the same refusal to bow before men who thought money meant they owned the world. "Blake trained under me," she continued, "knows every tactic I ever taught, every strategy I ever used. He'll be ready for anything the Angel of Death might try." "So don't be the Angel of Death," Thomas said quietly. "Be Sarah Reynolds. Be the woman who spent 5 years becoming part of this town, who knows every shadow, every hideaway, every secret these people trusted you with." The idea hung in the air, a strategy Blake would never expect, because he knew the legend, the ghost that haunted battlefields. But he'd never known the woman who'd found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. "We'll need everyone," Sarah said finally. "Every person who can hold a weapon, every building that can be fortified, every advantage this town can give. Us." "You'll have it," Martha answered for all of them. "Just tell us what to do." Sarah began outlining her plan, showing them how to turn their intimate knowledge of Dust Creek against Blake's tactical expertise. How to make every familiar alley and storage cellar into a deadly surprise for men who thought military training trumped local knowledge. Outside, Blake's men continued fortifying their positions, preparing for a battle against a legendary ghost. They never suspected that the real threat would come from the heart of the town itself. From ordinary people who'd decided some lines couldn't be crossed, the sun set on Dust Creek for what might be the final time. Tomorrow would bring either liberation or destruction, but whatever came, Sarah Reynolds had finally found something the Angel of Death never had. A home worth dying for. Midnight found Sarah on the church roof, counting stars and ammunition with equal care. Below, Blake's men patrolled with mechanical precision, their movements exactly as she'd once trained them. Perfect. Predictable. Fatal. "Found what you asked for." Thomas appeared silently beside her, still favoring his wounded shoulder. He placed a wooden box between them. "Blasting caps from the mining supply. Enough to wake the dead." Sarah's smile carried no warmth. "That's the idea." Through her scope, she watched Blake inspect the artillery pieces one final time. His preparations were flawless, exactly as she'd expect, which made his one mistake all the more telling. "He's too focused on me," she murmured, "on fighting the Angel of Death, hasn't even considered what else this town might be hiding." "Speaking of hiding," Thomas hesitated, "Martha's got everyone in position, even old Jenkins with his Civil War musket." "But Sarah, these aren't soldiers." "No." She turned to face him fully. "They're better. They're fighting for their homes." Movement near the jail caught her attention, Blake posting extra guards around the remaining prisoners, using them as bait, just as she'd predicted. But even that played into her plan. "You really think this will work?" Thomas's voice carried doubt. "Taking on Blake's elite teams with farmers and shopkeepers? Remember Mexico?" Sarah checked her rifle's action. How the villagers surprised your unit. Wasn't there shooting that beat you? Was knowing every stone, every shadow, every hiding place in their home. She saw understanding dawn in his eyes. All day the townspeople had been preparing, not with military precision, but with intimate knowledge of their streets and buildings, creating surprises that no tactical training could anticipate. Blake's expecting the angel of death, she continued. A ghost fighting from the shadows. He's not expecting an entire town to rise up, not expecting people he dismissed as sheep to have teeth. A signal lamp flashed from the saloon. Martha's all clear. Every piece was in position, every trap set. Now came the hardest part, waiting. Last chance to walk away, Sarah told Thomas quietly. Blake might still spare you if you surrender now. Tell him everything. The deputy was silent for a long moment, staring at the town he'd helped put in danger. You know what finally convinced me? What made me realize I was on the wrong side? Sarah waited, letting him find the words. It wasn't the gold or the corruption or even the killing. It was how they saw these people. Like they weren't even human. Just obstacles to be removed. Numbers on a ledger. He touched his wounded shoulder. But you saw them, really saw them. The strength in Martha's defiance, the courage in Tommy's reconnaissance, the determination in Jenkins loading that ancient musket. They were never sheep, Sarah said softly. Just people waiting for someone to remind them they could be wolves. Dawn was approaching, painting the horizon blood red. Soon Blake would make his move, would try to break the town's spirit with a display of overwhelming force. Sarah. Thomas's voice had changed, carrying something close to awe. All these years, the stories about the angel of death. They never mentioned you could smile. She touched her face, surprised to find he was right. Somewhere between preparing ambushes and organizing resistance, she'd remembered how to feel something beyond cold precision. Maybe that's the real difference, she mused, between what I was and what I am. The angel of death was a weapon, aimed at whatever target they chose. But Sarah Reynolds is fighting for something more than survival, Thomas finished. For people who've become family. The first hints of sun caught the church steeple, making the cross glow like fire. Below, Blake's men shifted positions, preparing for what they thought would be a simple execution of rebellious civilians. Time to go, Sarah said, gathering her equipment. Blake will move at first light. Wants everyone to see what happens to towns that resist. He'll see something all right. Thomas's voice carried new conviction, just not what he's expecting. They moved through shadow passages one final time, each to their assigned positions. The town held its breath, waiting for the coming storm. Sarah chambered her first round, the sound barely a whisper in the pre-dawn quiet. She wasn't just the angel of death anymore, wasn't just a legend meant to terrify corrupt soldiers. She was Sarah Reynolds of Dust Creek, and some things were worth breaking cover for. Some things were worth dying for, some things were worth living for. Blake launched his attack at dawn, exactly as Sarah predicted. The artillery opened first, shells screaming toward empty buildings she'd marked as resistance strongholds. The explosions were devastating, precise, and completely useless, because Dust Creek's real strength lay underground. Now, Sarah whispered into the pre-dawn quiet. Beneath the streets, Martha Wilson pulled the first lever. The carefully laid mining charges detonated in sequence, collapsing the ground beneath Blake's artillery positions. Guns worth fortunes tumbled into pre-dug pits, their crews scrambling for safety. Blake's response was immediate and professional. "Advance! All units! Close quarter protocol Alpha!" His men moved with perfect discipline, exactly as Sarah had trained them years ago, which meant they never saw the real trap coming. Tommy, the stable boy who'd spent days counting troops, pulled his signal cord. Every warehouse door in town burst open simultaneously, releasing stampeding cattle directly into Blake's advancing forces. The perfectly ordered military formations shattered as tons of panicked beef crashed through their lines. "Impossible!" Blake's voice carried clearly to Sarah's position. "She's one shooter, one ghost. She can't." Sarah's first shot took his command hat off. Her second shattered his field glasses. Not killing shots, she needed him rattled, needed him angry, needed him thinking about the angel of death instead of the town he'd dismissed as helpless. "Find her!" Blake's composure cracked. "I want every rooftop." The rest was lost as old Jenkins triggered his surprise. The Civil War veteran had spent 2 days rigging every church bell in town to ring simultaneously. The cacophony destroyed any hope of coordinated commands, forcing Blake's men to fall back on hand signals Sarah had designed herself. "Second phase," she spoke into the chaos. Throughout Dust Creek, civilians who'd played week 4 years implemented her plan. Martha's sewing circle dropped barrels from upper windows, splitting squadrons. The smithy's apprentices launched prepared volleys of horseshoes, keeping Blake's men from reforming ranks. Not deadly force. They weren't soldiers, but they knew their town, knew exactly how to turn its everyday features into weapons. "This isn't possible." Blake's control was slipping. "She's turned the whole town into a weapon." "No." Sarah's voice carried clearly as she changed positions. "The town was always a weapon. I just helped them remember how to fight." Her next shots were precisely placed. Weapon hands, kneecaps, disabling without killing. Each target selected to create maximum chaos with minimum death. Because that was the real difference between the Angel of Death and Sarah Reynolds. One had been a weapon, the other had become a protector. Thomas's voice crackled through their improvised communication network. "Harrison's men are breaking. They're running for—" "Let them," Sarah commanded. "Focus on Blake's elite teams. Don't let them reach the jail." Because that was Blake's real target. His men were fighting toward the prisoners with deadly purpose, intent on using hostages to regain control. But Martha Wilson had other plans. The widow's voice carried clearly as she stepped into view. Shotgun raised. Behind her, every prisoner Blake thought he held stood armed and ready. Their weapons were crude, tools and farm implements, but their eyes held the same steel Sarah had seen in Mexican villages, the same determination that had once defeated better armed forces. "Morning, Commander Blake!" Martha's bruised face split in a fierce grin. "Welcome to the real Dust Creek." Blake's elite teams hesitated, suddenly realizing they were caught in a crossfire. Ahead, angry townspeople with improvised weapons. Behind, spooked cattle and falling debris. Above, Sarah's shot split the air, taking Blake's lieutenant in the shoulder. The next 3 shots disabled his remaining command staff with surgical precision. "Angel!" Blake's voice cracked. "Face me! Stop hiding in the shadows!" "I'm not hiding." Sarah's voice seemed to come from everywhere. "I'm hunting, like I taught you in Mexico, like you forgot when you started serving corporate masters instead of justice." Throughout Dust Creek, the battle shifted. Blake's remaining men found themselves harried from all sides. Every alley held a surprise. Every window concealed a defender. Every shadow— well, some shadows really did hold death. Thomas's voice came again. "They're falling back, breaking formation to—" "Watch the artillery," Sarah snapped. "Blake won't retreat, not with his reputation at stake. He'll try to—" The rest was lost as Blake proved her right. He'd kept one gun in reserve, hidden until this moment, its barrel raised toward the center of town. "Last chance. Angel!" Blake's voice carried pure rage. "Surrender, or I turn this town to grash." Sarah's scope settled on his position, the shot clear but risky, at this range with these winds. But sometimes legends aren't about impossible shots. Sometimes they're about having something worth missing for. "Now, Tommy," she whispered. Above the artillery position, the stable boy's latest surprise dropped. Not weapons or debris, just water. Water that had soaked into the ground all night, turning the soil beneath Blake's last gun into mud. As he tried to fire, the entire position began to slip. Sarah's shot caught him as he scrambled for balance. Not a killing shot. She'd meant what she said about being more than the angel of death, but definitely a shot he'd remember. The sun climbed higher over Dust Creek as Blake's perfect military operation collapsed into chaos. His men, faced with opponents who turned their own tactics against them, began to break. But Sarah wasn't done yet. Because Blake had made one final mistake. He'd forgotten the most important lesson she'd ever taught him. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't the one you can see. Sometimes it's the one that's been hiding in plain sight all along. Blake made his final stand at high noon, exactly where Sarah knew he would, in front of the saloon where she'd served drinks for 5 years. Blood ran from his shoulder wound, but his eyes burned with familiar intensity as he faced the empty street. Enough games! He held Martha Wilson in front of him, pistol pressed to her head. Face me, Angel, or see how many civilians I can kill before you find your courage. Sarah watched through her scope as the widow gave the slightest nod. Even now, Martha was playing her part perfectly, still trying to fight the angel of death. Sarah's voice carried across the dusty street. Still haven't learned the real lesson from Mexico? The lesson? Blake's laugh held madness. I learned plenty. Learned that legends can bleed, that ghosts can die, that... Wrong lesson. Sarah stepped into view, her rifle lowered. Around them, the town held its breath. The real lesson was about what makes someone truly dangerous. Blake's eyes narrowed, tracking her movement. You're in the open, no tricks, no shadows, just you and me. No. Sarah smiled slightly. Just you. Martha Wilson moved like lightning, driving her elbow into Blake's solar plexus exactly as Sarah had taught her. The widow dropped and rolled as Blake's shot went wide, leaving him suddenly exposed. But Sarah didn't raise her rifle. She didn't have to. From every window, every doorway, every hidden position in Dust Creek, weapons appeared. Not just guns, pitchforks, tools, everything a town could turn into a weapon when pushed too far. That's the lesson you forgot, Sarah said quietly. True strength isn't about being the deadliest shot. It's about having something worth fighting for, people worth dying for. Blake's remaining men emerged from cover, weapons raised, but they froze at what they saw. Not just Sarah, but an entire town united against them. Ordinary people with extraordinary determination in their eyes. It's over, James. Sarah used his first name deliberately. Your corporate masters won't find any profit here, just bills for dead mercenaries and broken equipment. You think this changes anything? Blake's voice cracked. Aegis Corporation has armies, resources. They'll burn this town to ash and salt. The earth? No! Sarah's certainty stopped him cold. They won't. Because right now Martin Chen is delivering evidence of their operation to every newspaper from here to Washington. Proof of corruption, of illegal weapons, of corporate armies on American soil. That hit home. Blake's face went pale as he realized the full scope of her plan. You weren't just defending the town. You were building a case. 5 years of evidence. Sarah nodded to Thomas, who emerged with a stack of documents. Every shipment, every bribe, every corporate connection. Enough to destroy Aegis Corporation 10 times over. Blake's gun hand trembled. They'll kill me. If I go back with nothing but failure, then don't go back. Sarah's voice softened slightly. Remember who you were before they bought you, before you started serving profit instead of justice. For a moment, she saw the man she'd once trained, the soldier who'd believed in something beyond money and power. Then his face hardened. No! Blake raised his gun with deadly purpose. I'll kill you first. Kill everyone. Leave no witnesses. The shot came from behind him, Thomas's revolver barking once. Blake's gun flew from his hand, wrist shattered by the deputy's perfect shot. That's the other lesson you forgot, Thomas said quietly. Sometimes redemption is possible. Sometimes people choose to be better than their mistakes. Sarah watched her former student fall to his knees, all the fight draining from him. Around them, his remaining men dropped their weapons, facing the overwhelming force of an entire town's resistance. Dust Creek is under new management, Martha Wilson announced, her voice carrying clearly its own. Any objections? The silence was deafening. Sarah lowered her rifle as the townspeople began. Securing prisoners? Blake stared up at her, finally understanding what she'd become. Not just a legend, but something far more dangerous. A protector, a teacher, a member of a community that had learned to defend itself. The angel of death died in Mexico, she told him softly, but Sarah Reynolds, she found something worth living for. The sun hung high over Dust Creek as the town began to stir back to life. There would be rebuilding to do, wounds to heal, stories to tell. But the legend of the angel of death would fade, replaced by something far more powerful. The story of how one town stood against an army and proved that true strength lies not in weapons or tactics, but in the bonds between ordinary people who decide that some lines cannot be crossed. Some causes are worth fighting for, some homes are worth dying, but some legends are worth living for. The morning after the battle, Sarah stood behind her bar, a dusty saloon, serving drinks just as she had for 5 years. But everything had changed. Martha Wilson sat at her usual table, organizing the town's new militia with quiet efficiency. Tommy proudly wore a deputy's badge, his reconnaissance skills now officially recognized. Even old Jenkins had found a new purpose, teaching younger residents the art of strategic thinking through chess games in the corner. Feels different, Thomas observed, his wounded shoulder properly bandaged. He nursed a coffee at the bar, his path to redemption beginning with small acts of service to the community, being the person everyone sees instead of the one you're pretending to be. Sarah poured another round for the celebrating townspeople. Sometimes the real person is the one you become while pretending. Through the window, she watched federal marshals leading Blake and his captured men toward waiting wagons. Martin Chen had kept his word. Tomorrow's newspapers would expose Aegis Corporation's entire operation, ending their dreams of private armies and corporate territories. We found more gold surveys, Thomas reported quietly. They weren't just after control. There's enough wealth under these territories to build an empire. Let it stay buried, Sarah replied. Some fortunes cost too much to claim. Martha approached the bar, her bruised face wearing a fierce smile. Town council's meeting tonight. Time to decide what kind of community we want to be. Now that we know our own strength. Sarah nodded, understanding the real message. Dust Creek had changed. Its people had discovered something more valuable than gold, the knowledge that they could stand together against any threat. The legend of the angel of death would fade into history, but the story of how one town found its courage, that would be told for generations. A month later, Sarah stood at her window watching the sunset paint Dust Creek in shades of gold. Her rifle lay cleaned and oiled in its case, not hidden anymore, but not needed either. The town had learned to protect itself. Riders still came, sometimes drawn by fading rumors of the angel of death. But they found only a quiet town where the bartender's smile reached her eyes, where the Widow Wilson's shooting classes drew eager students, and where Deputy Thomas led a citizen's watch that made professional armies unnecessary. Staying, then? Martin Chen asked, appearing beside her for one final check. Sarah watched Tommy teaching younger kids the art of observation, while Martha drilled her militia in the art of community defense. The angel of death was a weapon, she said quietly, but Sarah Reynolds, she's found something better than legends. A home, Martin nodded, understanding. A purpose, Sarah corrected, smiling as Jenkins started another chess lesson in tactical thinking. And maybe that's the greatest victory, not in who we kill, but in who we help others become. The sun set on Dust Creek, touching the town's weathered buildings with fierce beauty. Some said you could still catch glimpses of a ghost in certain shadows, hear whispers of impossible shots and legendary stands. But the real story, that was written in the strength of ordinary people who'd learned they could be extraordinary. In the end, that was worth more than all the gold in Texas.